Hello, everyone. My name is Elio. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Scalestack, and I want to welcome you to the Revenue Engine Master podcast by Scalestack. Today, my guest is Meghan Goetsch. She is, a great leader. She started a career at MongoDB, where she was the 24th employee, which is crazy. And she helped MongoDB grow to about 700 employees, over like $1 billion in valuation. And she has had lots of leadership roles, including AWS. And we briefly overlapped while at AWS. Although I don't think I saw your name in some emails, but I don't think that we really worked together well there. But also at Vanta, and she's always focused on revenue growth and customer acquisitions. And currently she is the VP of Go-to-Market Strategy and Ops at Forter. And so first off, thank you for being here, Meg. Great to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and maybe do you want to add some color to your experience or things that you want to highlight, and maybe about your current role?
Yeah, sure. I think so I started my career in marketing operations at MongoDB, and since then I've kind of scaled into go-to-market or revenue ops, however you label it. So being able to support across sales, customer, and marketing. Yeah, right now I'm working at Forter, having the honor to do that there. I report right now into the chief customer officer, and my team spans enablement, operations, systems, sales development, supporting all of our go-to-market teams.
And Forter is what stage of development of the
Yeah.
company? How big is Forter now?
Yeah, Forder is a later stage startup, been around for almost a dozen years, focused on primarily the fraud prevention space. So we are supporting brands from making sure when you go buy on the sites that we're on, that you are who you say you are, you're not a fraudulent customer or bot. And since then, we've actually been expanding into other product areas. So super exciting business, super useful business, which is very cool to be able to like interact with a tool. Where some of my other jobs, you'd have to be a developer to be really working with what you're
To
selling.
know the product, yeah, very good.
Yeah.
And so maybe my first question is this, that you've had roles at very different companies, and MongoDB, which now gets considered like an enterprise, I mean listed on the Nasdaq, when you joined was a startup, very little, like 20 plus people. But you've also had roles at AWS and now Forter, which is a later stage. What would be like, you think, like the common theme that across all of these leadership roles, the common pattern that you've seen at these companies between like startups and enterprises that makes them similar but different, but like something that you've seen along the way?
Yeah, I think things that's always really helped me is, you always have problems to solve in any job that you're doing. And any company you're at is going through some form of scale. Sometimes that's hyper growth, that can be slowing down. So you're always growing in some kind of way. And so what's helped me in my role is just get clear on the problem. And, it can be really hard sometimes to take a step back. You look at these huge complex problems. But if you can narrow them down into what exactly you're trying to solve for, and then bring that working group of people around you as you go through that journey, it's going to help you save time. Although it can be very difficult to do, but that has been true of any business I've been in, um, and just been really helpful to me in my career.
And between startup, fast growing MongoDB, and let's say AWS, what would be that is the best feature of a fast growing startup versus the best feature of an enterprise like AWS in
And
your
like when you say
career?
feature,
I
is that
mean,
like yeah.
something that we can all learn and apply to
Hmm.
our job, whether we work at a startup or at an enterprise.
Yeah. I mean, like, so I think having a problem solving framework is helpful in any job that you're at. But I think something also that I've noticed is having an open mindset. You might go into tackling a problem from one perspective and through exploring the data and listening and that kind of research process, realizing that it's a totally different problem that you actually need to solve. And so I think a lot about growth mindsets. That's a useful framework for me, and it's making sure you don't like pigeonhole yourself into trying to solve something because of maybe where you first came into the problem from. And that's been true at any stage. And companies that have really strong framework thinking around solving problems. Amazon, I think, has lots of frameworks, so they help
Yeah.
you a lot there. But even in any startup, you can kind of pick up some simple ways to think about working through a problem, and that can help you solve challenges.
Yeah. I've also had like this type of like diverse experience at startups and at larger companies, including AWS. And I feel that as startups, you learn how to move really fast and adapt to constant change. And instead, at an enterprise, you learn how to dive deep and like really learn the craft and really like, be, you know, increasing your standards in how things can get done. And indeed, like you and I shared during the prep, that like there is a lot of leadership principles at Amazon that like I remember, like since day one they get like constantly reminded into the people. And so I'm curious about what were like your top leadership principles at Amazon.
Yeah, I think the one that stays with me the most, I mean, I think there's 16 now. There was 14 when we were there.
Way too many.
Um, is the ownership principle. I actually think ownership is something that should be with you any uh size of company, any job that you're in. But the way they phrase that principle in particular, and it's all about thinking about the longer term value of what you're trying to solve for, and also thinking beyond just yourself, your role, your team, and what does the business need to solve. And so that's something I really try to encourage my teams to think about is what is the business impact that you're driving? What's the business problem you're solving? And if you're just solving a problem because you want to make a metric look great for a team, or you're kind of boxing in a solution that can miss other parts of the business, and actually you might end up wasting a cycle just solving narrowly. So I was thinking one thing that I think about with that Amazon taught me actually with operators is think of your job as like a chief operating officer of like whatever part of the business that you're assigned to. And so with that, and the COO concept helps me think about is, think really broad and holistically, use the money like it's your own, and really make sure you're making the right decisions for the business. And so ownership sticks with me, top one for sure.
And I love that, like the being the mini CEO of your business. In a prior episode, one of my guests said that like he expected his like reps to run the pipeline, right, like
Yeah.
it's their P&L, and so like I think it's a
Yep.
great analogy, like being operators, being mini COOs of their business is a great way to frame it. How do you hire for that? I mean, you're building these teams at several companies, so like during like the time they spend with you, they learn new things and work with you. But like, how do you hire for that?
Yeah. When I got a chance to be a bar raiser at Amazon, which was amazing because it was so structured around leadership principles. So you really had a structured approach there. I think the way that I think about it outside of Amazon is being clear on the role, because not every role might not by on paper seem like an ownership role. But it's kind of asking, I think one of the questions I always like to ask is, tell me about a problem that you solved for that wasn't within your remit of responsibility. So kind of something that you saw a problem and you went and you solved it. And that can help you understand how people think about that, because some folks can get very territorial or just, hey, this is where I need to be focused in on. But you can see that thinking, that looking across at other groups or impact areas, and then also how you bring people along with you as you solve some of those problems. It's a big part of, if you do solve something outside of your designated space, you're going to need some other groups to be with you on that. Otherwise, it won't last.
I didn't know you were a bar raiser. I was a bar raiser too, and that mentality has stayed with me
Yeah.
over the years. I think it's one of the best legacies of my experience at Amazon, to be honest,
Yeah.
because it's applicable to other companies, and for the people, like a bar raiser is basically somebody that gets involved in all hiring
Yep.
processes and has veto power even over the hiring manager, because they are the people that sort of guarantee that the bar for like somebody that gets hired is, high. Great. Thank you for sharing that. And so you're now like building at Forter, and like, high performing revenue operations team. So how do you balance, like, the efficiency that you can get at larger companies, but also maintain the agility that is more typical for like faster moving companies like startups?
Yeah. Yeah, I think process is such a big part of what RevOps does. People, process, technology, kind of whatever three buckets you put that into. And something that I try to always remember is just be very aware of the state of the people you're working with. So if you're in an organization, and let's say you're building from the ground up, you're early stage, maybe you have a blank slate. Other times you're in a later stage and you're transforming what's already been built. um, as you think about what processes you need, and usually these processes are independent or underpinning better business insights, predictability, but think about the steps you need to take to get to a fully formed process. You might need to do like very, crawl, walk, run type of approaches. Um, and if you over rotate, your process just falls on its face and it doesn't actually become
Mm.
effective. It's why I always love having enablement in my scope, because they are really, really helpful as being sounding boards as you're thinking about processes that you want to roll out, and then also helping you be productive there. So just thinking about the balance of driving change, but doing it in a cadence and a pace that people can absorb and adopt. When you're in fast moving environments, that can be really hard to do because you want to do so much at once. And so it's just being very clear on kind of, I think about like a two-track mentality. What do you need to do immediately and drive change about, versus what is like a longer term plan that you're slowly building and optimizing for. So I don't know if that's like super clear guidance there, but it's all about balance to get
Yeah.
that effectiveness.
And at Forte particularly, were you the first VP in this role, or had there been like already some stuff in place before you joined?
Yeah, so almost over a decade old company, there had been people in place before. So a lot of my work and my team's work at Forder has been more of a transformation. So what has existed, where are we trying to get to, and then what's the behavior change or the process change that we need to drive to get from where we are today to where we're going. Very classic set of problems when you come into later stage startups. And one of the big pieces there is just knowing the history and asking the questions. So you have the context for why something is the way it is, so that when you go try to totally change it or slightly change it, you've got also some of those clues on like exactly how to do that implementation and enablement.
Very cool. And a couple of weeks ago, I was at a session with about 30 CROs in one room, mid-market and app type of companies, and there was a huge debate about what the first 90 days of a CRO look like. And so I'm curious, instead,
Yeah.
for like a role like yours, like, I mean, maybe specifically for the experience at Forter, where you've been very successful, like, what did the first 90 days look like? How did you start prioritizing things to do there?
Yeah, I think a lot about like the table stakes of a revenue operations organization and like getting really clear on those. So kind of like high level, what is your forecasting process? How are you predicting bookings and predictability of the business? Getting really clear on your financial models and the inputs that are in there, the assumptions that are in there, and how those are directly applying to what you're seeing in the field. Um, Getting clear on any other models, like a pipeline model that might be there in the business, and then just listening and watching those processes. So it's definitely a blend of absorbing and understanding exactly what's happening while getting pretty surgical and digging into the models and the assumptions and the data that are underpinning whatever decisions have been made around the financial, go to market strategy, financial strategy, and then what's happening across the team. So who's doing what, who owns what, where are their gaps. So kind of taking that approach, and then you're really not making there's going to be some quick wins that you can figure out in the first week sometimes, with depending on the type of operational context you come into, and also of course you've like learned some amount of things while you've been interviewing, but your systematic changes, the roadmap, like that really needs to wait until you've done some of this analysis and studying. And there's certain times where you're going to want to spend even more than 90 days in those areas. It's kind of understanding the biggest business needs, versus where you could pretty quickly say, we absolutely need new sales methodology. And like, that's what we're going to double down on with this part of the team. Um, so it's a little, it really, I've learned from the businesses I've seen, it really depends on the business that you're in, but diagnosing where you're at up front and as quickly as you can is going to be most critical to your success.
I think it's a great answer, because also at that panel with those 30 CROs, there were basically at the end like two camps. The camp of
Yeah.
moving fast, basically quick wins and like action, action, action. And the other camp was more like, well, you also don't have infinite time to ask questions. So you need to ask a lot of questions at the very beginning, because if you start asking questions like 6 months down the road, people go and tell you, look, I mean, like, why haven't you asked these questions before? And so there
Right.
were like two clear camps of people that are like, yes, action is very important, it's all about the quick wins. And then the other, which is like, you need to learn and ask a lot of questions deep into the organization to know what to do. And it seems that like you are crafting a strategy that is like the best of both worlds, which is great in my opinion.
Yeah. And I'd ask those CROs if they have operations people, because that honestly can change how you think about your first 90 days, is how much support might already exist or some fluency, that the ops team can support you on, versus if like you don't have analytics, you don't have certain things stood up, you very much have to ask a lot more questions. Um,
And that's great, because also there was a lot of debate about like what is a
yeah.
RevOps. And
Hmm.
I mean, it's a fast growing job category in America, and like, a lot of companies are embracing it, but I think that there is still a lot of learning that people are doing. And again, in the CRO group, there was like camp that was, oh, it's like systems and ops, and then like the other camp, which is not actually super strategic. So like, if you have
Yeah.
a fast growing sizable company and you don't have like a super fluent RevOps team, things are gonna fall apart. And so in that framework, I'm curious about like, challenges that you face leading revenue operations. I mean, like, we can say that you are like a pioneer in this category. And so what were like, challenges from which you learned a lot and that you applied like in subsequent roles?
Yeah, I mean, I really did believe in this concept of RevOps. It's part of why I moved out of marketing ops. And I still do, having done it in a handful of different contexts, having a centralized organization, supporting your systems, processes, programs, enablement, all that is going to be really beneficial for the business. But something I've been reflecting on a lot more recently is it's all about the company having clarity on their go-to-market strategy. And that can be tough, right? Your company's vision might still be in development, or you're redefining it, thinking about where the company wants to be in 5 years, 3 years, 1 year. That all is super important inputs to your go-to-market strategy. And something I've seen with RevOps where they can fall flat or just not fully embrace that centralized um, like mission is when it's kind of who you report into. So like you have to report into someone as this group, and so
Yeah.
usually that's a CRO. Sometimes it's a CCO, sometimes it's a CMO. But if those are like three C levels that then report into the top level executives, you actually have to think about that person that owns this group as also an arbiter of the go-to-market strategy. And really, they are responsible with their RevOps leader for distilling that strategy into a way that an operations enablement systems, et cetera, can really properly execute it. I've seen other situations where it's you kind of focus the most on whoever you report into, and that can just create, then you kind of get more of a sales ops organization than like a go to market ops. So it's something that's really interesting to think about is how you place it. I've also had the pleasure of reporting into a CEO and COO in my path to neutral parties, if you will, to
Yeah.
the go to market leaders. But then that's all about them having the time to spend in go to market. And again, if you don't have that clarity on the strategy, it's going to be a similar outcome. So um, I was talking to one go-to-market ops leader, and he says, I have one slide that's the go-to-market strategy for the year ahead, and I pull it up in every single meeting I'm in. I don't care if I'm with product or finance; it's the first thing that I pull up just to remind everyone what go-to-market is focused on, and being able to create that clarity and keep it evolving as the company evolves is the biggest like impact you can have as the leader of the org. But it's really difficult to do.
Lots of things that are super interesting to me in that. So, first off, reporting lines. I've most likely seen like reporting to CROs or even CEOs in smaller companies. I
Hmm.
rarely have seen like COOs, and that's
Yeah.
interesting, no? So, why do you think is that? Is because like it's basically a strategy role rather than pure ops, or it's because like
Yeah.
it's really aligned with the revenue generation, hence CEO, CROs.
Yeah. I mean, when I reported to the COO, it was just like we were in between a CRO. The go-to-market leadership was actually in flux, actually across the board, and so it was like a reliable, steady executive that could help like break the ship while we were rebuilding leadership. So sometimes that can be like an interim approach. Um, And then, but yeah, CRO is most common. You're also starting to see more CROs who own marketing and customer, or like that maybe they're called like a president of go to market or a chief commercial officer. I've been seeing that a lot more. That's a great person for RevOps to report into because again, they are responsible for the go to market strategy. So it's whoever can kind of play that role, and the companies all like shook hands and agreed that this person is representing that. Um, Otherwise, you'll just get an org that will be slightly modified towards whichever the focus area of that
Yeah.
leader is.
I think that CRO needs to own revenues, hence
Yeah.
it includes marketing. To
Hmm.
me, it does, not just sales, because otherwise it's like, you're starting to divide too much and like there is no one goal, which
Yeah.
is revenue. So, what I've seen working the most effectively is like CRO owns sales and marketing, and then RevOps is really like direct line to the
Yeah.
CRO, helping them build all of the systems and operations and strategy that you need in order to run
Right.
revenues.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a controversial opinion, right?
Very,
Because
I
CMOs
know.
do not want to report to CROs. And then marketing spends a bunch of time on stuff that isn't always directly tied to revenue. But I agree. I'm supportive of it.
And also, frankly, I think that it depends on like, if you work at Unilever, is the CMO. that
Right.
runs the show, right? So I think it really depends also what type of organization, how you
Business.
accomplish
Yeah.
revenues. Yeah, what's the business? But if it's like sales led effort that basically runs like the majority of revenues, everything needs to go towards that. So I
Yeah.
think that that's like the assumption that we're talking about a certain type of companies and businesses that like are sales driven really,
Yeah.
and that's everything needs to support that effort. But I do know it's controversial, and but that's what I think that I've observed to be the most effective for those type of companies. The other thing that you mentioned, were you talking about Mazen at MongoDB before, or somebody else maybe?
Oh,
That when you said
about,
like I
sorry,
was
who?
talking Mazen at MongoDB, like the marketing operations leader. But no, you
Oh,
mentioned that
no,
you
I didn't
talked to
know them.
somebody. Oh, okay, okay. I thought that you said something around like marketing ops, but you mentioned someone that was showing first slide to every meeting
Oh,
that they
yes.
had,
Yeah.
and so I find myself in this situation constantly. I'm always repeating a
Yeah.
lot of
I bet in your
but be,
sales cycle. Yeah.
but also not only sales with product, with like investors, with like potential customers, and I find that like it's so useful. You
Yeah.
have to constantly repeat the key drivers of what you're trying to accomplish and almost the vision. And so I was curious, since like it attracted your attention, I was curious if you use some of that like message reinforcement, when you talk to your leadership, when you talk to your teams, when you talk to like people with product responsibilities and so forth. And so curious
Yeah.
if you have
I
some of
could
that.
get so much. I'm not like super skilled at that. It's something I'm definitely working on. But if you have former consultants on your team or someone that can finance is great for this too, just create that visual that can distill down your strategy. It helps so much. But I think my years at Amazon has made my slide production skills very low.
Long form. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I don't say like, I actually love the long form. The slide format is, I did start my career in management consulting. So I actually first developed that and then like
Yeah.
moved to long form. I think long form, 6 out of 10 is better. But what I was focusing on like, explaining the vision, explaining why we're
Yeah.
doing certain things, like, and repeating myself constantly to explain the framework. And I was curious if you use that you know technique almost to align lots of different teams when you have like meetings with leadership or with product or with other people in your
Yeah.
or maybe externally.
Yeah, no, I definitely need to improve that for sure. With my own team, I do reinforce our vision and mission statement at every team meeting, just kind of always setting the context of that, which can be useful if those are impactful statements. But yeah, but one of the things I'm trying to really get clarity on for Forder and is what are those focus areas, and so we've been getting better at it for sure. But the consistency of the message, it goes so far because then it's and that's part of like when you think about why Amazon was so successful. It's leadership principles. It was just like always in your mind. And so part of consistency of message, it becomes a common language. And so you start saying these things, and if someone already knows what you mean halfway into the
Yeah,
sentence, just helps you move faster in alignment.
yeah. And so I totally agree, and I like and I think the example of Amazon is a good one here, because repetition was the technique
Yeah,
that was used. I mean, like we heard this leadership principle everywhere. They were like plastered on the walls, and like people used them in meetings. Um, One of the things that I keep repeating to whoever would listen, really, is that in many ways in B2B, technology has failed us. And so I'll explain. So, like, we use apps, whatever, Instagram, TikTok, and like consumer Airbnb, and all of these like consumer apps are, for the most part, amazing. And they just work without effort, and I don't need to read a manual, and there is no enablement, and they just start to make sense as I use them. And instead, my observation, I'm not the only one, but like it's part of my mantra, is that in the business world, technology has failed us. And that somehow we drop the expectations that we have as consumers using these apps. And so we, basically accept that systems are clunkier and are not as easy to use, and we need support and training and all of that. And so my curiosity is do you share some of this or at all? What's your observation, since you use a lot of tools and a lot of systems in your team?
Yeah. No, it's such a good point, and I think the AI boom that we're in just puts a mirror up to the problem even in a bigger way. I don't have a really great like s- snappy analysis of what's happening, but I agree. I think one of the things that I always think about for my sellers, especially, is how many tools they're logging into in any one day to do their job, and how do you streamline that in an effective way. And you're starting to see that across all the different platforms. More and more platforms are having forecasting and call recording and AI call notes and all the things kind of coming together, which I think makes a lot of sense, and it can create a lot of benefit for the folks that use those tools. But it does feel like we still have this gap um, in being able to translate some of this even sometimes unspoken rules based decision making that we do um, analog into the systems. Part of what's so interesting about Scalestack, right, is that you're basically trying to bring in AI to automate what an operations analyst is doing manually, or someone playing around in Excel trying to organize data. Um, so I'm excited for where we're going. I don't have I think on my, there's a lot at Forder particularly, we just didn't have a lot of automation in place. So a lot of our work right now is kind of the basics of automation. We're implementing CPQ. And it's just really interesting going through that process, because if you haven't thought about automation in your workflows in the past, you've just built them manually and low tech, um, you really can feel failed by technology, because it feels like such a large gap to get to that next stage. And I think there's certain areas of selling and selling's productivity apps that are like that too. So really thinking about how do you cross the chasm in some of these areas um, that are truly essentially just like a manual, inputting information into a field into something that's more AI driven and automated.
Yeah. There was an artist, I forget her name, but a few months ago she went viral saying, "I want AI to do my laundry so that I can do my arts and
Yeah.
writing." So sort of that's the hope here, right? That AI will be such a catalyst for streamlining, automating a lot of the stuff that is more manual, is more
Yeah.
boring, so that we can, as humans, we can focus our attention on what requires strategy and thinking and big system analysis and all of that. And so I'm curious in your case, what is the balance between thinking go to market strategy in your current role, go to market strategy, and instead thinking about systems and straight operations, and if you have a goal to rebalance that over the next months or years.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're building so much of the foundational stuff right now. So that's the focus. And then I'm where we don't, where we can do an AI first approach, we're doing that as much as possible. So even we have to migrate all of our historical, dozens of years of contracts into a system that can be, read through by a contract management system and CPQ. We are looking at AI tooling for that first, as opposed to what you'd historically do, which is hire a bunch of contractor paralegals and
Yeah.
just feed them pizza for days. Um, and then with data enrichment, right, part of what we've been talking about, trying to think about how do you just do a better data enrichment strategy, because we don't have some of the analysts and things in place that could do some of that data crunching. So I would say we're being opportunistic opportunistic, focused on like the key areas we need to build up first. Um, and then as we can move into some more technology driven, AI driven approaches.
Very good. I would say, you know, 1 to 3 years from now, things will look very different.
Yeah, I hope
And
so.
yes. And so, what would be your advice to somebody that, like, you know, wants to be a RevOps, SalesOps person, leader that is entering now, you know, the workforce? What would be your advice to these aspiring SalesOps leaders?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've got a very like, this isn't a technology forward
Yeah.
piece of advice, but something that I think is super important when you go from that sales ops manager to that sales ops leader is just getting to know the financials of your business. This is actually true for a lot of different roles, but um, the purpose of you as a leader, and before you're a leader too, but really becomes clear when you are a leader is you have to make sure you're you're propelling the company to hit its financial milestones. And so being able to spend time with your finance team to understand the finance model. If you don't have the training or background on how to read a P&L, go take an online course. There's like so many about them now. Listen to a talk and really understand how your work or the work that you're influencing with sales efficiency and productivity directly feeds into that model. That's going to just propel you to be focused on really the strategic needle moving items, because you hopefully have a team underneath you handling the other really important pieces. But kind of the day to day, the tactical pieces. So that's often like when I coach folks on going to that leadership step, just make sure you really get finance and become friends with your finance team. It goes leaps and bounds. So
Yeah. I'm Italian. I moved here to the US to do an MBA, and strangely enough, the best class that I took, one of the two best, the other one was negotiation, was accounting.
yeah,
And
totally.
the reason, well, the guy was phenomenal. Actually, I forget his name. Unfortunately, I should look it up. But like by knowing how to read an annual report, you could like gather so many insights that seem inaccessible to most,
Yeah,
even though they are written in the P&L, in the financial report. It's all written there, but you need to
yeah,
know how to read it, and then you can sort of work backwards to decide to understand like what's the business and what are the main drivers and what's working and what not and what needs to be fixed because it's
yeah,
important and so forth. So 100% agree, even if it's not technology, although technology now AI can help us read annual
yeah.
report in in a pretty in-depth way and then draw conclusions.
And if you don't have an annual report, I mean, just know, like, ask your finance team, what are the assumptions going into the
Yes,
model?
yes.
Just please list them out and define them for me. Because I found like in a couple of environments where we didn't actually ask that assumption question deeply enough. No, you sure we got all those assumptions laid out there? Because those are the things that really can impact how you look at the business.
Yeah. And I think that as you were talking, something that came to mind is like you need to know how things work to even change them, and the curiosity,
Yeah,
like even the curiosity to you know ask the questions and understand and dive deeper are like so important. And so like I meant annual report because I was thinking about the accounting class, which mostly dealt with like public companies. But at the
fair.
end of the day, that's a skill in terms of like, do you know how this thing works?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, be a
and
great, I
that's
mean, if you get to work with sellers every day that are great at discovery, just, try to learn those skills because you can find out so much.
yeah. They know how to ask the questions and how to get like insights from people that can drive the deal forward. Very cool, Mike. This was super fun. Maybe one last question I have for you is like, we're talking maybe like connected to this, like how things works, and like one tool is reading, obviously, and so I'm curious about like what you typically read and maybe a book that you read recently that you really liked.
Yeah, I love reading. I'm usually always reading a fiction novel. That's kind of how I unwind at the end of the day. But I thought I'd call out a nonfiction book. It's called Love and Whiskey by Fawn Weaver. And it's a really cool story about the distiller that influenced Jack Daniel's distilling. His name was Nearest Green. He's an African American man. And it's the story of that, of their relationship, of how he influenced that business. But then also, the writer is an entrepreneur herself, and she's standing up a distilling company in his legacy. So just a really great read, really easy read. I'm sure it'll be like a TV series soon enough, but good one to pick up.
And maybe like they very cool. I love the story. And so did they also go into how a whiskey is made and like all
Oh
of the
yeah, yeah,
innovation?
yeah.
So
And you
how
can go
things
buy
work.
the whiskey too if you want to drink whiskey while reading.
Very cool, Mike. Well, this was great. Thank you so much for spending some time with us, and good luck at Forter and everything else. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.